Hello. Purpose of this video is to take you through the process of the linear regression modeling using your TI-84 calculator. To do this, I'll take you through problem number 27 in section 2.3, which is on page 119. And it's a problem about the Winter Olympics and the number of countries that are participating as the years progress from 1980 to 2002. So the book gives you a table of values that include all of the years of the Winter Olympics between 1980 and 2002 and their corresponding number of countries that participated at each year. So we want to take that data and put it into our calculator. And our first step is to hit Stat, then Edit, and then go ahead and put in the years by entering them and then hitting Enter. And you can see that there is a pattern right up till 1994 when they switched so that the Summer and Winter Olympics would alternate. And finally, we end in 2002. Okay, go to our next list and input the number of countries, and you get a feel for that relationship because as we're progressing in years, or X is increasing, then our seeing the number of countries are also increasing. It's not an exact constant rate, but it does give us some sense of what that relationship looks like by just inputting the data. So let's turn it into a visual, and we do that by doing second y equals, and going into our first plot, or whichever plot you want, and then putting the cursor over on and hitting Enter, then putting the cursor over the first graph, which is a scatter plot graph, and hitting Enter, and then going down to our X list, or our independent variable, and to point it, if this happens to be at L1, but to put in L1, I'd hit second 1, and that is L1. And then to put in L2, I would go second 2. And if you can see, it's not a problem if you end up putting in an extra digit. So I've got, I'm asking the calculator to look at L1 as my independent variable and L2 as my dependent variable. Let's see what the graph looks like. I'll get out of this by going to second quit, and then I'll do zoom, and I can do zoom 6 or zoom 9. In stats, we use zoom 9 a lot, so that tends to be, that makes it perfectly for my data. Zoom 6 gives you a picture where your origin is centered at 0, 0 on the screen. And actually, so if I want to go zoom 6 and just see the difference, when I graph it there, I'm like, oh, what happens? I don't see my data. And then when I, it's because the line doesn't go through that format, so that's why I go zoom 9. Okay, so now this is what my data does look like, and you can see that there is a linear association going on here, and I would suggest it's positive, and I want to create a model from this data so I can predict data that predict values that aren't necessarily exactly in the years that I have inputted. All right, so to create my model or my line of best fit, I go ahead and hit Stat, and across the top go to Calc, and then I go to Menu, option number 4. You'll be familiar with the AX plus B, and we normally would see MX plus B, but it means the same thing, serves the same purpose. So I go ahead and hit 4, and again, probably these will be pre-populated if you just put in lists, but you can certainly do the same way in terms of second L1 to put in your independent variable or wherever it is, second L2. Don't worry about frequency list right now, and you do want to store that regression equation. To get to where you want to store it, you hit the vars button, across the top you go to Y vars, hit enter at function, and then pick your address where you want to store it. Traditionally, it goes to Y1. And then when you hit calculate, it will overwrite any equation you had in Y1, and that will become your regression equation for this data set. Okay, so I hit enter, and now you can see I've got my slope at A, which is 1.7, which basically is saying that for every year that goes by, the number of countries participating in the Winter Olympics participates by 1.7, 1.8 countries. And interestingly, my y-intercept is at minus 3,460, and that is basically when at year 0, as opposed to year 2002. And you can't have negative countries, so therefore that will facilitate a conversation that we'll have about domain and range and which part of the model is actually usable for us. So I'll go ahead and now I'll hit graph, and you'll see that the line now is overlays our data points, and you can see again the goal of this is to minimize the area of the squares formed by the residuals, and this is a good a line that does a good job of minimizing that area. So now let's use it to predict. One of the things, if we want to predict how many teams were in the Winter Olympics in 2014, using this data, we would be extrapolating because we're going outside of our data set, outside of our X values. But, and so if you took chemistry, you know there's a little bit of danger in extrapolating. But let's go ahead and be crazy and let's do that. All right, now to let the graph do the work for you, if you go to second calc, and you get the value command, you hit enter, it asks you, well, what value do you want to enter? So I'll say, oh, I want to know about 2014. So I hit enter, and it goes error. So what's happened is, not to panic, but what's happened is I'm extrapolating. I'm outside of my data set. So I've got to change my data set by going to second window, which is table set. Oh, I got to get out of here first. Quit first. And go to second table set. Second table set. And you can see my minimum is 1977, so I can make it 1980 or 980. And my maximum year is 2004. The calculator automatically did that based upon my data. So I want to put in, let's go 2020. And again, I can change my X scales if I want. I can go into by 10s, by 4s. You know, it probably makes sense to do by 4s, huh? And my Y minimum, well, I can actually do that. There can't be any less than 0 countries. And I think there's about 230 countries in the world today. That changes, but that's somewhere right around there. And my Y scale is 1, that's fine too. So now I've changed my graph a little bit, and you can see it's kind of made it bigger and flattened out, and the line goes past my data points. So outside here, I'm extrapolating. If I'm trying to find a number inside my data points, I'm interpolating. Okay, so let's go ahead and extrapolate. Let's go back to second calc and hit the value button again. And now I'll put in 2014. And it tells me that I should expect about 100 countries. And so if I go ahead and go to Google and say, well, geez, how many countries were in the 2014 Olympics? 88, so not a bad model. Not great, not perfect, but certainly not bad. It gave us a decent prediction that we can go from. But that is the purpose for being able to get data for a scenario, use your calculator to create a linear model, and then use that model to give you information you might not otherwise have. Hope this was useful, and I hope you understand how to use your calculator as a valuable tool or as a valuable resource in algebra.